And we're back in the car, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Friday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, tomorrow, and I'm not trying to jinx anything, but tomorrow marks a very special birthday for a very special person in the movie business as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to name the person at this moment because I do believe sometimes in jinxes. But I'm going to give you a little tease as to who I'm talking about via the movie that I am discussing in this episode. A film that, in the career of this particular gentleman, I would say of all of the major movies he's been involved in, either as actor, producer, director, or in the immortal words of Chevy Chase, answers D, all three. But the major film, the touchstone movie, the legendary, iconic all-time film that I have spoken of the least in the career of Clint Eastwood Jr., the answer to that question is the 1966 conclusion to the Dollars trilogy from the sensational filmmaker, Quentin Tarantino's favorite filmmaker of all time, Sergio Leone, and the movie is 1966's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Now, Clint Eastwood was born in 1930. He was in the military, he was in the Navy, he dug pools, and he had been a contract player for Universal. He was in a bunch of movies. He was in Tarantula with John Agar. He had another film he did where he played a lab assistant, and Rock Hudson was the star. And he was certainly a very distinctive, not surprisingly, looking individual. He did a guest shot with his future friend, the late, great James Garner, on the old Maverick TV series. It was called Brett Maverick. And then, of course, there was the movie with Mel Gibson in 94, which was a spin-off on that. And I think James Garner was supposed to be playing the guy from the TV series. They don't really make it clear, but for people such as myself, it's fun to say, yeah, it's definitely the same guy from the TV series. But Clint made an impression on TV. He's 27, 28 years old, and he already is able to impart a sense of menace in what amounts to a bit of a clownish villain role in the world of that episode of the Brett Maverick TV series. It was called Duel at Sundown. And Clint wound up leaving Universal. The contract didn't really go in the direction that he expected. And someone else, just for reference, Clint's buddy, another late actor, died very young, David Janssen from TV's The Fugitive. David Janssen became a bigger star than Clint on TV, but then Clint's movie career. So Clint managed to get the second lead on a TV show called Rawhide. And from that, he began to get noticed elsewhere. And so in the early 60s, I think it was 62, he got an opportunity to go to Italy where to work with a filmmaker that he had heard of. I don't think they had met, Sergio Leone. And the film was called Magnificent Stranger. This is what they shot. The working title was The Magnificent Stranger. So Clint reads the script and says, oh, this is basically a remake of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo. This is a remake of Yojimbo. Wow, what a great idea. It's a spaghetti western, but it's the same story as the famous samurai film, Yojimbo. It's kind of like Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, same idea. Now, Clint was very, very canny, and for such a young man, in his early 30s, he was pretty well read and pretty up on which already iconic directors did what. He just knew a lot of stuff. So he goes off to Italy to shoot Magnificent Stranger. He has a great time, makes good money, doesn't have to work that hard. There weren't that many different locations. It wasn't highly stressful. And Leone, they had a terrific working relationship. So Clint comes back to the States, and he doesn't hear anything about Magnificent Stranger getting released, goes back to work on Rawhide, looks at other projects. And, as far as he knew, I guess the film really wasn't as good as I thought. I don't know why a Leone film would get buried, but film doesn't come out. Yeah, a couple of months goes by. He's not even thinking about it anymore. What a disaster that was. And he gets a call from his agent, a guy named Lenny Hershan, who's Clint's longtime agent. He says, Clint, this is great news. A Fistful of Dollars is crushing it overseas. And it's crushing it at the box office. Are you paying attention or whatever he says? And Clint says, what the fuck are you talking about? So what? What does that have to do with anything? I don't know anything about that. What is that movie even about? Why would you call me? And the agent's like, Fistful of Dollars. The movie you shot with Sergio. What? There had been a miscommunication. Nobody had told Clint Eastwood that film had been retitled and was in fact getting a release. To say that it's the pre-social media era in 1962 or 63 or 64 is to basically beggar the obvious. Nobody told Clint, oh, we retitled that movie. They, whoever the they is, they retitled the movie A Fistful of Dollars. It's tearing up the box office. Fucking great, man. Well, that's pretty good news where Clint thought that his agent had maybe lost his marbles. Why would you call me with that? Oh, he knew what he was talking about. Clint just had not been informed because there was no one on TikTok or Instagram or Snapface, in the immortal words of Bill Belichick, I think he was just messing around, but he confused Facebook and Snapchat. He says, yeah, I'm not on Snapface. Great quote by Belichick. But Clint then, after the success of A Fistful of Dollars, did for a few dollars more, working with Leone and another great genre actor who was active into the 80s in Lee Van Cleef. Usually played heavies, but not always. Escape from New York with Kurt Russell, the John Carpenter film from 81, he plays a somewhat antagonistic guy who is not as antagonistic as you maybe expect because it's Lee Van Cleef. For a few dollars more was a success, and it set up the conclusion of the so-called Dollars trilogy, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which the release dates are weird with that film. And what I mean is, it's listed as 1966, but I don't think it got a full release in the States until 67. I don't think that it would have worked this way, like deep into 67, but it is listed as 1966. And Clint by this time I talked about Stallone, Europe and Stallone. Clint was probably a bigger box office star in Europe at this point than the States. I think that by the time of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, he may have cracked the top 10 in the States. They actually used to do it that way. It's so absurd, where they would say this is box office number one based on whatever factors. I don't know if it was just pure box office gross, because you could have a movie where a year where you only make one movie and someone else makes three, and all three were like, I don't know how they calculated it. But Clint was a rising star, and he had left Rawhide. I think he left Rawhide in 64. I'm not sure of. I never saw an episode of the show. I know the nominal star of the show was actor Eric Fleming. That's the only thing that I know him from. But Clint was able to move past that, and he was a star. He was a rising star. And he did a film, an Italian film, shot in Italy. There's actually a lot of really cool pictures of Clint. There's a picture of him riding a bicycle and what looks like almost a little hand truck kind of a contraption, like almost a rickshaw, in Italy. And the shots of Clint in Italy, he looks the most like his son Scott in those pictures, because he had the similar facial hair, and yeah, Clint was so young. Because there are a lot of pictures where obviously they're father and son, but you wouldn't say they could be brothers. But the shots of Clint in Italy, they look like if you cross the space-time continuum, you would think that these were fraternal twins. That's how much they look alike. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. So they went off, again, to Italy. The reason why the films are called spaghetti westerns, when I was younger and just an average movie fan before actually deep diving into reading and understanding things, I thought the films were called spaghetti westerns because they were not necessarily big on plot. They had the consistency of spaghetti. That's what I thought. But that is not why they were called spaghetti westerns. They were called spaghetti westerns because they were supposed to be set in the American West, but they were financed with Italian money, and they were shot in Italy. So I was at actually level 3 or level 4. It's level 1. They're called spaghetti westerns for the most nail meathead reason. They're shot in Italy. It's supposed to be Monument Valley, but somehow maybe it's near the Italian Alps. We're not really sure. Shot in Italy, funded with Italian money. So The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Clint, for the third time, plays a character who does not present himself as having an actual name. Hence the phrase that you've probably heard, the man with no name. There is a chance, if you're a young person, let's say in this instance, even just under 40, you've heard the phrase, the man with no name, and maybe you've seen something on TikTok with Clint Eastwood, and you wondered, well, what does that mean, the man with no name? In the world of a fistful of dollars, in the world of a few dollars more, in the world of the good, the bad, and the ugly, there are names ascribed to Clint's character, who is the protagonist, the main character, the hero in all of those films. But he does not say, my name is, Eminem. My name is what? No, he doesn't tell anybody what his name is. And he kind of had a little fun with this in 73 in the film High Plains Drifter, where he never gives his name and nobody really calls him a name. In the world of the good, the bad, and the ugly, the Eli Wallach character calls him, what does he call him? Blondie. He calls him Blondie. As far as we know, his name is Blondie. And then the joke is that he went ahead and had a movie career, Heart of Glass, The Tide is High, but no, not that Blondie. But the Eli Wallach character decides to just call him Blondie. But he is the man with no name. And this is something that John Wayne had an issue with. And John Wayne is a very problematic figure in movie history for a number of reasons. He had a very old school mindset, which is, there's nothing problematic about that. But the issue with John Wayne was he was very, when I say that someone is old school, it's not necessarily negative. But in the case of John Wayne, I feel like it kind of is and was a bit of a negative. Now, nobody could look at Clint Eastwood's career and say, wow, he was so progressive in the 60s, or that, politically he was left or no. But the problem I had with John Wayne, and he and Clint Eastwood were friends, or I should say they were on friendly terms. There's some great pictures of them together when Wayne was making The Shootist with Clint's friend Don Siegel. So it's not like it was always contentious. But the issue I have with Wayne is he said stuff about certain Clint Eastwood westerns where I feel like his reading of them was just flat out wrong. It was almost as if he didn't look at his own movie with John Ford, The Searchers, and see, are you not even aware of what your character is representing? Because he was acting as if he had never been in a Western that did anything other than espouse whatever you would call old school values. Bro, your character in The Searchers is a Confederate war hero. What the hell are you talking about? The character in The Searchers is presented as a bigot, practically an unredeemable, horrible human being who wants to murder his niece. Those are not old school values. Newsflash, plot twist, spoiler alert. So he had issues that Clint made Westerns. They got under the Duke's skin. They were well done. But you would think, as a purveyor of great Westerns, John Wayne, Stagecoach, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, also with John Ford, The Searchers, and Howard Hawks' unbelievable Red River. John Wayne made way more challenging films than he seemed to even realize. You can't look at Wayne's best Westerns and say, oh, they espouse this point of view. They don't. They're all over the place. And that's what makes them so great. You can look at The Searchers and the way the Duke holds the screen. Maybe there was a little bit of jealousy. I don't know. But for example, in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and this is something that bothered Wayne, he wanted heroes and villains to be broadly painted. Good, bad. And again, it's as if he didn't even understand Red River or The Searchers, because those films are all about shadings. They're all about shades of gray. Well, in the world of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Blondie, Clint's character, he's the hero, and the joke of the title is that he is the good. But it's more because everyone else is simply worse than him. It's not that this is this noble, wow, white knight in shining armor. He's just less craven, and he's not evil. It's important to note, his character is not evil. But to say he's good, I mean, I guess, but he's good relatively speaking. And I always took that title to be a bit of a wink from Sergio Leone. It's a sarcastic title. Now, Lee Van Cleef's character, you can argue, is pretty bad. But I also don't like the idea that Eli Wallach, who I think is an absolute riot in that movie, they call him the ugly, and I think that he's the nicest guy out of the three of them. I don't even think it's close. But the story, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, is almost 3 hours. And if all you know is, okay, it's about these three kind of disparate personalities, gunslingers, if you will. And two of them, in the case of Blondie and Tuco, that's the Eli Wallach character, they work together to take advantage of people who don't know that they're working together. They come up with this crazy scheme where one guy will pretend that he's going to kill another guy, and then they're going to take the money. It's very convoluted. It's a little bit a Fargo-ish attempt where you're putting one over on people. You keep pulling the same scam in different towns. Well, in the world of Fargo, it was about what was supposed to be a phony kidnapping and collect ransom. This is not a phony kidnapping, but from a conceptual standpoint, if you see this movie, you'll understand what I'm saying. It's a similar concept. So they pull this scam a number of times, but they have a very contentious friendship, and they go back and forth between one guy being nice to the other and with the other guy, and then they're trying to kill each other, but then they have to not try to kill each other. They have to try to work together. But it turns out there is $200,000 in gold buried in a cemetery somewhere in Monument Valley, but it's not really Monument Valley, but it's a cemetery with thousands of graves. Now, you ask the question, how did they do this in the Civil War era? How did they even have a cemetery this size? I have no idea. I did not study that in any kind of scholastic situation in my life up to this point. But the bad, Lee Van Cleef's character, Satenza is his name, the ugly, Tuco, Eli Wallach, and the good, Blondie, Clint Eastwood. Each man they have 33 1/3% of the information. One guy knows the name of the cemetery and where it is. Another guy knows the name of the gravestone, the marker where the gold is buried. And the third person one person knows where the cemetery is. One person knows the gravestone. Whatever it is, each guy has one third of the information. I know the name of the cemetery, I know where it is, and I know the grave, I think, is the exact thing. So as much as these three guys, well, certainly Blondie and Tuco would just as soon kill Satenza, because he's comes across as almost pure malice and pure evil. He's kind of closer to what Henry Fonda does a few years later in Once Upon a Time in the West, which I actually think is the best movie that Sergio Leone ever made. And that's saying something, because The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, many people consider to be the single greatest Western ever made. I think I might put Once Upon a Time in the West above it, if that's even possible, and maybe even above Unforgiven, but they're all right there together, like, 97, 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, all-time greats. But you have these three guys, in theory, working together for a common goal. We got to find the gold. And Clint is the character who knows the gravestone. He knows where it is. They just have to figure out the name of the cemetery. So the three guys work together. And then when they reach their kind of locus point, they're in the cemetery, is when you have the Reservoir Dogs scene. And if you've ever watched the movie Reservoir Dogs, the Mexican standoff that climaxes that film is very clearly, well, it's more than inspired. Quentin has talked about this. He wanted to do his own version of Eli Wallach, Lee Van Cleef, and Clint Eastwood staring each other down and showing down in this situation where it appears there's no way that you can do anything other than maybe you won't die, but you're going to get shot. If you have three armed men drawing on one another, it's possible that two guys will draw on one person and one of the two won't get shot at. It could happen, but usually you're at least going to take a flesh wound, and you're probably going to be dead because the person could just rapid fire before they get shot. So this movie climaxes with this Mexican standoff. And it isn't enough that it's just the three guys under the sweltering, what's supposed to be Utah, New Mexico, Arizona sun, but it's somewhere in Italy. But we get it. We're watching the movie. We're not thinking that this movie is shot in Italy if we don't know. It's not just the setup. It's Ennio Morricone, Oscar-winning composer, worked with Quentin. He won the Oscar for Hateful Eight 10 years ago. Morricone's music. In the kind of history of film composition, Morricone is maybe half a notch behind John Williams, and that is the highest praise that anyone can get. He is on the level with Bernard Herrmann, with James Horner, with James Newton Howard, with Gabriel Yared, with the other incredible composers of Randy Newman, guys like that, of that ilk. John Williams to me is I'm sorry, I forgot Jerry Goldsmith. Goldsmith and Williams are peers, no doubt about it. Goldsmith actually had more scores, and I think he may have actually been nominated for as many Oscars as John Williams. But point is, Ennio Morricone's main theme from this film, you've heard it in commercials, you've seen it on TikTok, you may not have known it was from this movie. That's from this movie. That's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But there's a piece of that plays during this scene. And the music just builds and builds and builds. And the tension is off the charts as the film moves to this climax and the music reaches a crescendo during what we know is going to be a shootout. We have no idea who's going to survive. Now, Sergio Leone was a guy who knew how good he was, but he also was very quick to praise others and deferential. And one of my favorite Sergio Leone quotes, he talked about his best collaborator, his best writer. He basically said, "It's Ennio's music that makes my movie special. There's nothing that I could put on the page or another writer could put on the page." Like Dario Argento, the Italian horror filmmaker of, later, was a writer, and he wrote Once Upon a Time in the West with Leone. But he said, it's Ennio's music that makes this so great. It's the music that makes it so great. So he's almost saying, I know what I'm doing, but without my collaborators, it's all about them. Don't make it about me. And I'm reminded of one of my favorite Oscars, the 98 Oscars, the Oscars of Titanic. Top 10, maybe top 5 greatest moments in the history of the Oscars on TV. At the 98 Academy Awards, receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award was Stanley Donen, who, his most famous films, Singin' in the Rain and Charade, the one with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn, the best Hitchcock film that Hitchcock never made or didn't make, Charade. So Martin Scorsese, I'm gonna tell you a story with a happy ending. He introduces Stanley Donen. Stanley Donen does this unbelievable tap dancing number on stage, unscripted, unlike Fred Astaire at the 1970 Oscars, where people knew that was going to happen. No one in the gallery, no one at the Kodiak Auditorium knew that Stanley Donen was going to do a tap dance number. And you could see it on the faces, whether it was Sean Connery, whether it was Arnold Schwarzenegger, Nick Cage, everybody was going nuts in attendance. But then when he got to speak, when Martin handed him his Lifetime Achievement Award, Stanley Donen gave his version of Sergio Leone, pretending that the key guy was really Ennio Morricone. Donen said, the key to success in this business, the key to winning an Oscar, the key to getting a Lifetime Achievement Award, you gotta show up. You gotta show up. And if you cast Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn and Gene Kelly, maybe you'll have a chance to win one of these little fellas, which tonight looks Titanic. And that got another big laugh, making a Titanic joke. But he was saying, I'm only as good as my collaborators. I got to work with Cary. I got to work with Gene Kelly. I got to work with Audrey. I got to work with Matthau. In later years, he got to work with Gregory Hines in the film Tap. That was his last feature. So Leone maybe had an ego, but he didn't like to talk about himself as if he was the guy. And in the world of this film, Morricone's music is the most memorable element. In my opinion, there's no question about it. It's not performance. Yes, there are epic battle scenes. The Civil War is going on while this story is taking place. That's another thing that is kind of undersold. You could almost call this a war film. It's more known as a story of three, heels attempting to uncover $200,000 in what is presumably stolen gold. It didn't just randomly get there. Somebody stole it, somebody buried it, that person is probably deceased, etc., etc. But the movie has this incredible crescendo. And it doesn't, I'm not going to spoil it if you haven't seen it. It doesn't turn out the way that you expect it to. We're probably thinking you're going to have Lee Van Cleef, Eli Wallach both die, and Clint walk away, as Blondie without a scratch. The film doesn't really do that. It goes in another direction. We get to see the gold. Like that would be a MacGuffin if we never actually see the gold. But we get an idea at the end of the film, or by the end of the film, that the man with no name, he does have a heart. He doesn't have a heart of gold, but he also doesn't have a heart of stone. He will not just randomly kill people. He is not a mercenary per se, even though there are moments in the film, and certainly in the first two, where he does do mercenary kind of stuff, where he's getting paid to do certain things. And this is a concept that comes up to a greater extent in Once Upon a Time in the West, where Henry Fonda's character is horrible. Oh, little blue eyes, the guy with one of the bluest eyes, next to Paul Newman, maybe the bluest eyes in the history of Hollywood. He's horrible. The character that he plays in Once Upon a Time in the West, he makes Lee Van Cleef in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly seem like, you know what, he's an okay guy. He's nothing like Frank from Once Upon a Time in the West. But the way the film wraps up, and Morricone's main theme just echoing on the soundtrack, there is no way to exit The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly if you're seeing it for the first time and not be just blown away. And Leone made movies that they take their time to get to the point. He was not rushed. He was not hurried. And this is something that you see in a lot of Clint Eastwood's work, where he allows the material to breathe. He allows the actors room to maneuver. He is not racing to get from scene A to scene B to scene B, from plot point A to plot point B to plot point C. Leone lets the films feel as if it's an open world kind of a situation, where you don't skip past, for example, in Once Upon a Time in the West, a father putting buns out and preparing for what he thinks is going to be a feast and a celebration. He doesn't rush past that. He was not forced into cutting his movies, except in his last film, which a lot of people consider his best, the Jewish gangster movie Once Upon a Time in America, with James Woods, Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro, among many others, of just an incredible Keitel, Danny Aiello, unbelievable all-star cast. But that was a film that was 230 minutes. The original cut, which is like 3 hours and 40 something minutes, they cut that for the US release and they butchered it. But Leone, the Dollars trilogy, and especially The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Once Upon a Time in the West, he was able to make his movie. His cut is what got released. And as a filmmaker, when you make a really long movie, you cross your fingers, but because this was funded with Italian money, people sympathetic to Sergio, and because the first 2 films in the Dollars trilogy did so well, he submitted his cut. No problem, Sergio. Let's go. And The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, on a budget of less than $1.5 million, made more than $25 million worldwide. That is, I don't need to tell you, that is an enormous box office hit. It grossed more than 16 times its production cost. It is one of the 5 best Westerns, I believe, ever made. And it is a kind of movie, if somebody says, give me 5 Clint Eastwood films, I know the name, I see him, this old guy he did the film Juror Number 2, but give me 5 Clint Eastwood movies to understand why this guy was a big deal, just as a movie star. Why was he a big deal? We'll go The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Dirty Harry, Unforgiven, In the Line of Fire. Those are the 4. Because it shows him at different stages. I mean, if you want to throw Gran Torino in there, you can, as the older era, $1 Million Baby. But to show that he was able to, his star persona started to shift as he got older. People usually become more set in their ways as they get older. Clint Eastwood did the opposite. You look at a film like Mystic River, for example, and the people that he was working with. There's a lot of jokes made at the time. Clint, who had been a nonpartisan Republican mayor of Carmel, California, and he's making a movie with Sean Penn and Tim Robbins, and everybody says, oh my God, these guys must be arguing nonstop. But meantime, if you pick it up in 2025, you ask Sean Penn, what was it like working with Clint? He said it was fucking incredible, and Sean won an Oscar. And you ask Tim Robbins, you and Clint get along? He said, got along great, I love that guy, and vice versa. So things don't always go the way that you expect. And Clint Eastwood is never what we expect. And happy birthday in advance to my single favorite person to ever work in the movie business. And The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, an extraordinary film. It put Clint even higher. It wasn't until Dirty Harry that he was world's movie star number 1. I'm pretty sure of that. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was not world's movie star number 1 until Dirty Harry came out in 71, and also just cleaned up at the box office. Unfortunately, it was helped not for a good reason, because The Zodiac Killer, the film, although it was based on Harry Julian Fink's book Dead Right, and Clint and Don Siegel tailored it a little bit, it's a little bit like The Zodiac Killer, and so the kind of topical aspect of it definitely helped the box office there. But The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, a great representation of how and why Clint Eastwood became Clint Eastwood. He was 35 when the movie was shot, and just the star power is firing off in all directions. The screen presence, the ability to hold the camera, the ability to hold close-ups like his forebear, John Wayne, the ability to get so much information across with just his face, just his body language. There are a few people in the history of cinema who could do that in the manner of Clinton Eastwood Jr. This has been episode 525 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Friday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.